Hello and welcome to our share, our weekly share on the Parshas Hashavua. This is Parshas Pinchas with the commentary of the Alshich. Once again, I have to apologize. There was no share last week. I was flying, as I did warn you the week before, from place to place. I was doing a Shabbaton in Cincinnati, which was extraordinarily enjoyable, by the way. And it was, if you were flying last week, you will know it was a very, very difficult environment for flying because of the outage of all the computers that work on Windows, which seems to be all of Delta's. And so it didn't lend itself to doing the share. Anyway, apologies. Back this week, let's start with the refuahs we normally, or some of the refuahs we normally use in dedicating the share. Chaim Mordche ben Esther. I'm sorry, Chaim Mordche Dov ben Esther. Should have refuah Shalema refuah Chai ben Sora, or a Chaim ben Chana Yehudis. Little boy waiting for the transplant. Chaim Aaron Yedidia ben Tzipora Chava, little boy in Australia with who needs a refuah. And Rachel Lavana Bas Shirley. All should have and be well and have a Riches Yomim. Another important thing, quickly looking at my clock up there on the wall, is that my wife and I went to have a meal with two very dear friends of ours, and the lady of the two said, "Why is your share so long?" She watches my share, the truth is that I wasn't quite aware that 50 minutes last 149. I did ask once before what would be the ideal time. So Mrs. Hoch has advised me, and we've come to the agreement that about 35 minutes is maximum. I'm watching the clock there. So I don't go on too long there. So I hope that makes this improves our listener figures, watchers, etc. Here we go. This week's Parsha is the Parsha of Pinchas. And we all know the dramatic failure of the rather nasty non-Jewish prophet Balaam to curse the Jewish people. He turns around and says to his employers, the Moabites, that, you know what, if you want to get them, I can't curse them for you, but I can give you a tip. Their God hates immorality, sexual immorality. Just get them to fall into that trap, and their goose will be well and truly cooked. And that was the plot that hatched at the end of the Parsha, when the Jewish people come to a place called Shittim. V'yochel la'om is noisel ben Ismael, and the people start to do immorality with the daughters of Moab, but tikren la'am zivga and they get involved in the feasts to their god, to the Moabite gods, and the people bow down to their gods. Pretty serious stuff. Intriguingly, as I always point out, or the Alshich points out, there is no reaction from God for this. But when it goes on to be some Israel Baal Pa'or, but when the Jewish people get involved with Baal Pa'or, then Hashem gets very angry. But there's a difference between the word Am, which was the first usage of or reference to the people in the story, and then Israel. So the Jews who provoke God's anger, because he gets angry at that one, is when they get involved with Baal Pa'or, is because it's talking about the Jews who could know better and should know better. When the ordinary people mess up, well, God knows that ordinary people are ordinary people, and maybe they do not have very much Jewish education. But when the people who know better and should know better mess up, then that's when God gets angry and takes it seriously, and there's repercussions which are not too jolly. And that's that story there. And everybody knows what happens. So there is a man, a Jewish man, a great Jewish man, who takes a princess, let's jump in there, a Midianite princess, and proceeds to parade her in front of Moshe Rabbeinu, challenging him with the chutzpah, saying, "Is this woman permitted to me or not? And if not, who allowed you to have your non-Jewish wife?" And that's when Pinchas gets up and famously executes them for this terrible outrage. But that was last week's parsha. I want to focus on this week's parsha, And here it tells us the story of what comes next. And the next bit of the story is that Pinchas becomes promoted to being a Cohen. Even though his father was a Cohen, um, the ordaining of his father and the rest of the Kohanim would bestow the status of Kohanim on the children they would have from then on. But as Pinchas had been born before, then this would not apply to him. So he would not have been a Cohen except for what he did in this action that he carried out. So he gets a special reward, which is the Bris Shalom, and indeed the commentators say that he is Eliyahu Hanavi. He never died. And there would be perpetual priests from ever on, forever on. But then the Pasuk says, V'shem ha'ish Yisrael ha'makuba, asher huka, the name of the Jew that was slain, asher huka es Midianis, who was slain with the Midianite woman, was Zimri ben Solu. In actual fact, the Gemara says that he had, in Sanhedrin 82b, they had 5 names. But we'll keep with Zimri just for going on. And he was, intriguingly, a son of Shimon, the founder of the tribe of Shimon. Anyway, so basically, if I can get back to this, Ben Solo, Nasi the Beisla of Elishma, and he was the prince of the tribe of Shimoni, the Shimoni, not Shimon, Shimoni. V'shema Isha, and the woman, Hamuka, who was slain, Hamidianis, the Midianite woman, was Cosby Batsur. Cosby, the daughter of Tsur, he was the king of Midian. Rosh Umas, base of the Midian, who he was the head of the whole nation of Midian. And Rashi says that their hatred for the Jewish people was so intense that the king was willing to prostitute his own daughter to make sure that she would seduce these great Jews, and particularly Zimri, and get as a consequence, of course, there was a plague that broke out and thousands of Jews were killed. That's a story which we're looking at now. It's a very, very interesting happenstance that this particular parsha, or rather the other way about, what's been going on in the world in the last week, which is really very dramatic. I'm sure you would agree that it seems to be that dramatic moments in history are coming fast and furious. And indeed, many commentators point out, as we're getting towards the end of this world, this 6,000-year world before the 7,000 Messianic era, then history is moving, is speeding up. This is when the week when President Joe Biden threw in the towel. He's not standing, and somebody who has been occupying the position of Vice President, Kamala Harris, has taken over. Interestingly, when Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel addressed a joint session of the Congress on Wednesday, she absented herself in a most insulting way to attend some ridiculous student event instead of being there with one of America's closest allies when the Prime Minister was speaking, at the invitation, incidentally, of the Senate and the Congress. And she wasn't the only one. But interestingly, now that she has become the candidate from the Democratic Party, people managed to dig up, well, unsurprisingly, as they do it on both sides, some rather disturbing stuff. Of course, when she's now the nominee for the Democratic Party, the fact that she has so publicly distanced herself from the Prime Minister of Israel, and indeed from Israel itself, her pro-Hamas pronouncements in the past are quite distressing and quite disturbing. But there was then a picture of her with her stepdaughter. Now, she married a fellow called Doug Emhoff, who was a Jew. And it was rather embarrassing a while back when they tried to use that as a good bit of fundraising and get support from the really stupid, naive Jews, because he was going to light a Hanukkah and tell the story of Hanukkah, which he completely made a mess of because he had not a clue what Hanukkah is all about. in many at many levels. Anyway, so basically, this fellow Emhoff had married a previous non-Jewish woman, and they have a daughter. She's 25. She's called Ella Emhoff, and there's pictures of her with her stepmother, and apparently gone like a house on fire. And indeed, she turns out to be a supporter of Hamas and a fundraiser for UNRWA. You know, that's the United Nations Let's Get Money to the Palestinians so they can rape and kill and torture Jews organization. And it's a very interesting thing here. A Jew married to somebody who is clearly not Jewish, and his child, and of course, the previous wife was not Jewish, she was Swedish, the child being anti-Semitic. But, you know, the interesting thing is that it's something that always troubled me. Why would any Jew want to marry a non-Jewish person? Nothing wrong with non-Jewish people. Of course, if they convert to Judaism, it's not a question of race. But as soon as you marry outside the Jewish faith, then the chances of your children staying Jewish, I know if you're a woman, then the child's going to be Jewish, but staying Jewish are remote. But far more than that, the chances of your child, and certainly your grandchild, being an anti-Semite, see Doug Emhoff's daughter for further details, is really, really, in my experience, very high. So what nachas, as it were, would it possibly give you that your child or your grandchild hates your people and where you come from? We have not too far from where I'm making this recording, people in my neighborhood who are exactly that. Very anti-Semitic couple. And she just happens to be the granddaughter of a Jew. It's a very common phenomenon. Anyway, interestingly, and also I remember in Glasgow, where I came from, there was somebody I knew, and this person's grandmother had a phony conversion and was married to her grandfather. The grandfather looked very Jewish, stereotypically Jewish. Der Stummer caricatured Jewish. And the grandmother was very not Jewish looking, very, very pink skin, white hair, and very, very non-Jewish features. So very sadly, at the end of her life, she got dementia and simply couldn't understand who this old Jew was in her apartment. And literally, we phoned up the police, 999 in the UK, in Scotland, and they would turn up, and she would say, "I don't know this guy is, there's an old man." They thought that he had dementia and wandered in. Eventually, when they noticed, the marriage photographs and stuff, they got the idea it was her that had dementia. It was very cruel. It's not so necessarily intended to be cruel, but it refers to a cruelty. Some young Jewish man who is bowled over by the beautiful young non-Jewish woman, said in Yiddish, I only know in Yiddish, will end up married to an alte Goya. Was läuft noch a schöne Schicksal. The person who runs after a bit of a non-Jewish girl is going to end up with an old non-Jewish woman, like that story is. And that really, I suppose, is really a nice parallel to what's going on in the world, or an element of what's going on in the world, to this week's Parsha, when famously, as we just saw, there is this great Jew, and he is a great Jew, who is bowled away by this non-Jewish princess. Of course, she intended him to be bowled away by her. There is a point which I'd like to stress when we get to the Alshich in just a second, and that is any Jew, the Alshich is going to tell us, who pursues the physical desires of this world at the expense of the spiritual desires, certainly is going to be shortchanged. It's a very, very poor bargain, and that Yiddish phrase obviously would be a nice expression of the poorness of the bargain. But on top of that, it's ultimately something that's going to lose you the next world. But the Alshich is going to tell us something on top of that. But you're a young man, and incidentally, when it comes to intermarriage, the figures are there's overwhelmingly not, well, it used to be anyway, maybe it's changed. It's usually Jewish men who marry non-Jewish partners, far more than Jewish women. Jewish women are far more loyal to their people and their peoplehood than non-Jewish men, than Jewish men. So, but they're young, and hormones and passion and all that sort of stuff. What's that phrase they used to say in the whole Hollywood movies? I heard Rebbetzin Heller, who's now Rebbetzin Gottlieb, say this once in a year when she was laughing with the girls. What's that phrase? This thing is bigger than the two of us. Um, it's so naive. Yeah, it's usually a man married to somebody else, sort of like, or talking to a woman maybe married to somebody else as well. This thing is bigger than the two of us. We can't control ourselves, really. But of course, Oscar Wilde, the famous Irish, the Hebrew word is maneuver, a moral derelict, but very brilliant writer, poet, Irish fellow, famously said, the only way to get rid of a temptation is to yield to it. That's from The Picture of Dorian Gray, his famous book, and one of his famous books. And he elaborates on this. They're torturing yourself by not giving in to what you want. That's really the theme that we're going to pursue here. Okay, so the Alshich in the Seder of Truma says something very, very interesting. And so let's have a look at that. The Seder Truma there is talking about a famous, it's the construction of the furniture for the Beis Hamikdash. And there the Alshich says the following thing. I assume I've got the right page. Let's just check, because it's looking not like the right page to me. Rish Tzaddik Dalit. Yeah, well done, Yehuda Yoina. I don't know about you. I see the shape of pages. I know where I am. Anyway, so basically, so it's talking about making the Aron in the Mishkan, and eventually that would be, of course, in the Beis Hamikdash. And here we have a mimer. It's in the Shmos Rabbah, and Shmos Rabbah Lamed Al Beis, and it says, Omer Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Shlosha Kasarim, 3 crowns, Kesa Malchus, Kesa Kahuna, Kesa Torah, the crown of Kahuna, the crown of, the crown of royalty, the king's crown, the Kesa Kahuna, the crown of a Kohen, a priest, the Kesa Torah, and the Kesa Torah, and the crown of the Torah itself. And then he says, after all that, last place, the Keser Shem Tov Ola Al Gabehem. But the Keser, the crown of a good name, goes on top of all of them, all 3. To which the Alshich asks the obvious question, well, if that's the case, well then how come it says there are 3 crowns? If you say that the Keser Shem Tov goes up on top of all of them. So therefore, the Alshich says the following thing. I think this is very important. That's a good place to jump in here. So they ask the question, how could it be? Let's see. But like, also says the Alshich. Notice it doesn't say the Keser Torah goes on all of them, or is better than all of them, but goes on all of them. So it accompanies all of them. The Keser Shem Tov, to be a Keser Shem Tov, has to go on all of them. And then he says something, I suppose you can maybe anticipate this. And he says the following, Hu Keser Shem Tov Levadayim Shul Torah Einaklum. Because the Keser Shem Tov, renown would be a good way of translating. Keser Shem Tov, a good name, but it means a famous name, a renown, name of renown. But a name, to have a fabulous name or a famous name, but not have a Keser Shem Tov attached to it, not to have Torah attached to it, and just to have renown is an irrelevance. For example, it's like the Adarabba, Lo Amaretz Chosid, because the rabbis teach that somebody who is an Am HaOretz, an ignoramus, cannot be a Chosid, cannot be a good person or a great person, morally speaking. Milon Agadol me Rabbi Akiva, who's greater than Rabbi Akiva? In his time before he became Rabbi Akiva, when he was just Akiva. He was the leader of the anti-religious party in Israel. He was famous, but he didn't have Torah. But he said a great name, but there was no Torah. So a great name without Torah is a nothing. And of course, he famously said, if you give me a Talmud Chacham, I would bite him. And similar the other way about, that these three crowns, the crown of monarchy, the crown of the Kohana, and the crown of Torah. But if you don't have a Shem Tov integrated into that, part of that, well, you can somebody that's Talmud Chacham was a horrible person. You can certainly have a king who's got the crown okay, but he'd be cruel and vicious and slaughtered tens of thousands of people. You can have a Cohen, the high priest, who is utterly corrupt, and Jewish history was full of them. So in other words, you need to have a Kesef Shem Tov together with all these three things. And you need to have these three things, or the Kesef Shem Tov. There's a symbiosis going on here. You need both. Now, but that's an introduction from the Alshich in Parshas Truma. We can look at the Alshich in Megillas Rus. And if you're watching this instead of listening to this, I'm now holding in my hand a very exciting something that came to me just this 2 days ago. This is an Alshich. This is an Alshich which was printed in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, in 1616. And somebody, a friend of mine, gave it to me as a present. He bought it in an auction for quite a lot of money. And so this is a second edition Alshich, and it's on the Megillas and also part of the rest of Tanakh. So I'm going to very, very carefully put the screen down so you can see this. If I can do that, if it doesn't fall. You know what, I can do this. Maybe I can't. Oh, okay. I'll hold it. Let me just get the page. I have to open it very carefully for obvious reasons. And get to where I left the mark. Yeah, here it is. Ooh. Right. Second page. It's in the Megillas Rus. So now I'll put the camera down so you can see this. See how, actually it's quite bright there. It's actually very yellowed. And that's where we're going to look here. So if I put that back up on top of the computer. So it's talking about, and it's in the third verse when it says the Elimelech dies, the Ishnomi. The Elimelech, Ishnomi dies. Now, before that, it says the name of Ish was Elimelech. Now, Ish means a great man. But when he dies, it says the Yomas Elimelech Ishnomi. So this is what the Alshich says here. Listen to this. He says, and I'm reading this, I don't know when the last time these words were read, it was certainly printed in 1616. Eshe yichaven al derech ze loheres eich nigra merachoi kimidechila hoyo ish ishtoi ubonov tefelim elov. At the beginning of the story, where it says that they went out from the land of Israel, then the posset actually says that they were attached to him. They were his two sons. She was his wife. The greatness was being attached to him. But for what he did in staying outside the land of Israel when he could have come back to the land of Israel, he loses all of his greatness. Now his name, his fame, is that he's married to Naomi. Before, Naomi was married to him, the greatest rabbi of the generation. Wow! But now it's the other way about. In other words, as the Alshich points out here, Kishem haniach ka'asher kasvino, as Ibed Malosa, he lost his greatness, but Nasas Tofel Aleha, and then he becomes, as it were, subservient, or merely his greatness is reflected because he's connected to her. Here, before it said it was he went left the land of Israel, the Ishtoi and his wife and his two sons. Right, so he left. He was the big guy. But Ella, Adarabba, now, but now, no, the other way about. He is now attached to her. His great name has dropped. It's easy to drop, to lose a great name. 1616. I shall put this over here. And let's look at the Alshich, what he has to say here. And this is very interesting. Quickly watch. So this is what the Alshich says here. And I think this is fabulous. What did it say from the beginning of our share? It says, Shemel Ish Yisrael HaMakah, the name of the Jew who was slain, Asher Halka Es Midianis, who was killed with the Midianis, was Zimri ben Solo Nosi Lebesa of Lishmaini, the head of the tribe of Sheba. So the Alshich wants to say, and I'll read this bit of Alshich, I think, inside. Omer Ish Yisrael Yerami Yisr. It seems that the name of the Ish Yisrael, to say, as the Apostle says, the name of that Jewish man, what does it have to say? Ish Yisrael. Lama V'Shem Amukah. Just say the name of the guy was slain. Why say Ish Yisrael? The Gam Omer Asher Heka Esa Midyanis. And it also emphasized he was slain with the Midianite woman whom he Yisr. That's extra as well, because it's already said that back there. So why does it mention who they were here and not from before? Questions. This is what he says. But this whole story, the story of Pinchas, is about an individual who was Mekadesh Shem Shemaim, who did a Kiddush Hashem. Ki Pinchas Shahaya Karim Asa Ben Puti, the ones that the other Jews made fun of him because his grandfather Yisro, before his conversion to Judaism, used to fatten cows for slaughter to avoid a Zorah. So that's he's got a terrible background, but he made a Kiddush Hashem, whereas this fellow's got a fabulous background and he made a Chilul Hashem. You can lose your great name very, very easily. Then Pinchas was now able to become a Cohen and attach himself to the Aaron side of the family. And that's what it says, because the word Ish implies somebody very great. Whenever you find in Hebrew, in our Tanakh, somebody referred to as being an Ish, it means a very significant man. As we said before, the name of the Ish was Elimelech. He was a great man, but he lost his greatness and he lost his great name by his actions. Anoshim needs to get Alshich just citing proofs that the word Ish, or in the plural, Anoshim, refers to great people. Geshema Ish is Geshem Ish Yisrael. So now that it says the name of the Ish Yisrael is telling you that Zimri started out as a great man. Shoyachoshev Godel Yisrael. He was a great man in the Jewish people. But now, now that he's been slain as a consequence and for the ridiculousness of his behavior, he's now equated, the Pasuk equates him to the Midianite woman that he wanted to marry, that he had a sexual relationship with. Al derech ma she'amar Chazal, it says in Pinchas Rabbah, l'shichav etzlo liyos imo. He wanted to sleep with her, to be with her. L'shachav etzlo ba'olam hazeh, liyos imo ba'olam haba. To sleep with her in this world, to be with her eternally in the world to come. It was going to be so bad. This crime is going to be so bad. Remember that Yiddish phrase we said before? You marry the beautiful young non-Jewish woman, you end up married to the old hag. Well, this is not just, of course, with old age, then a woman's beauty disappears. A man's ultimately as well, but particularly as women are far more beautiful than men. You use the word beautiful with reference to man, then it's more noticeable. And that the contrast between youth and old age is not good. Here it's going to be forever. That's to say, the name of that Yisrael, that great man that caused him to be Mukah slain, Asher Huka Esamidas, who was slain with the Midianite woman, he's going to be with her eternally in both worlds. Wow. And that his death was a horrible death, an unnatural death, a painful death. Don't think, don't think that the fact he died is a painful death, which is often taken to suggest that the person will therefore, that will be an atonement for them. Not in this case. Despite that fact, he's going to be with that woman for eternity. Who is Zimri ben Solo? And he's Zimri ben Solo. Now he says it's Zimri ben Solo, but very often it goes back and says, as it does with Pinchas, now his Yichus is not just his father, but his grandfather going all the way back. Why does it stop at Zimri ben Solo? Maloni Sasa ad Dor Shlishi, and doesn't go back to the grandparent or via the great grandparent. Kasher but Tzaddikim, as it does, as the Chumash often does when it talks about Tzaddikim. Olahadil hadoifi almar v'nosi beis avi l'shimoni, and not only that, to emphasize the point, it says he was the head of l'shimoni. Why not Shimon? Shelo osa ma'isa avosav. And the answer is to emphasize that he didn't behave as the male line of Shimon did. Because what did Shimon, the original Shimon, do over an action of sexual immorality? The kidnap and rape of his sister Dinah. He avenged it. He did somewhat similarly to Pinchas. Shimon and Levi went in and got back their hostages and slaughtered when the people resisted, and slaughtered and wiped them out. So because he's not behaving like a Shimonite, then at that point, you know what? You've lost your greatness. We're not going to attach you to this fabulous family. No, because you have severed that connection yourself. And therefore, you're just a tragedy. An absolute tragedy. Let me tell you something to conclude. I've got a few minutes. And let me tell you something to conclude from the Sefer Ber Yosef. We moved from the Alshich to the Sefer Ber Yosef. Yosef Salant. And he's talking about the crime that we're talking about. Marrying out. Choosing to marry out. Whether you're a great man and you're going to lose your Shem Tov, or even if you're an ordinary man, an ordinary Jew, a Jew who knows nothing. But a Jew who knows nothing must realize, unless they're mentally deranged, must realize what I said before. There's a good chance that your child is going to be an anti-Semite. If I remember correctly, there was a fellow called Collins who, after the Second World War, I think in the 60s, started an American Nazi party, a new American Nazi party, based in Chicago. It was very successful, grew very, very, very horribly, cancerously. And as a consequence, was caused all sorts of trouble for Jews in Chicago and beyond. And this, if I remember rightly, went on for about 10 years until they discovered that their Führer, this guy called Collins, was a Jew. Well, halakhically not, but his father was a Jew. His father was a Jew who was in Auschwitz. After the war, married somebody non-Jewish and had a nice non-Jewish son who became a Nazi, the American Führer. Still alive as far as I know. Anyway, listen to what the Rambam says in Hilchos Isurei Bia. When the Rambam in the section of his Mishnah Torah talks about relationships which are forbidden to Jews, he says, because of lo pogo boikanaim, hari onsho mafurish b'dibra kabbalah shehoya bekoresh. That the Dibra Kabbalah, like in our tradition, the punishment for marrying out is chorus. The soul is severed from the Jewish people. Shanema says, Ki holo Yehuda. Holo Yehuda. We don't need to go into that bit. That if you marry a non-Jewish woman, it's as though you're marrying the non-Jewish God, which of course is what we saw, was the whole story of what happened in Shittim. That if you do such a thing, you engage in a sexual relationship with a non-Jewish woman, it's ultimately Chilul Hashem. But there is no punishment in halacha from that a beis din will carry out for somebody who is married out. I mean, if it was the beis din with full force of beis din, there is no punishment to give here. You can't look up the books and say, oh, he's married non-Jewish woman. The halachas say that we should do this, that, or the other to the fellow. There is no this, that, or the other. But writes the Rambam, but don't think it's therefore not that's such a big deal. So it's quite unimportant. Because of all the sexual relationships which are prohibited to Jews, This is the worst. Now, the other ones, incest and adultery, etc., the consequences for being found guilty of incest, adultery is death. And yet this is worse. And yet the consequences is zero as far as the base team here is concerned. But why is it worse? So listen to the Rambam. Shaben minha erba benoi hu the kol dover beklad throl nashav. Because if you have a child from an incestuous and adulterous relationship, it's still a Jewish child, albeit a mamzer or mamzeres, but it's a Jewish mamzer or mamzeres. And the Gemara famously says, Kon Gadol Am Haaretz, Mamzer Talmud Chochem. And there's a lot to say on that subject, but leave that as a headline. Apal Bishu Mamzer, but Ben Minakutis in a Benoi. But your child, when you marry out, is not actually your child, not your Jewish child, not your Jewish child. You've removed your son from me, says God. Mosa Isa Melifnei Hashem, but of Garm Ledovik Ba'akum, Shevdelenu HaKadosh Baruch Mehem, and that will inevitably mean that that child, your son, or certainly grandson, will attach themselves to all the values and beliefs of the non-Jewish society in which you sunk and attached yourself to. That's the Rambam says. That's what Rambam says. Fine. It's a week of echoes from the Parsha and what's been going on in the news, in the headlines, in the history of the world. But there's an important message, I think, for us here, and that's simply to keep the name Isha, great Jew, means the bare minimum, making sure, doing enough Jewishly to guarantee that your child is going to be able to stay a part of Klal Yisrael, and not, chas v'shalom, to make it likely that your child is going to become somebody who sides with Hamas. I wish you all a good Shabbos. I think I've done it in 35 minutes. So hopefully I will have approbation instead of the correct analysis that I've been going on too long. I hang my head in shame. Good Shabbos.